In this video, we will look at ethical theories because these provide a context to understand the ethical principles in our practice. This is a very broad overview of some of the ethical theories from both the Euro-Western and the indigenous research paradigms, taken from Ellen Cara's work. You can find a link to this resource in the reference section. First, the ontology focuses on evaluating whether the action of the individuals regardless the consequence of these actions. Therefore, an action is evaluated as ethical or not in terms of the action itself. The ontological ethics focus on rules and laws that guide our action, with the purpose of formulating universal guidelines that can be applied to different situations. Second, consequentialism focuses on the consequence of the action rather than the action themselves. Hence, rather than looking at rules, laws, and universal codes, people who follow consequential ethic look at the morality, look at the context, and look at the particular unique settings in which they are trying to make an ethical decision, and trying to work out what the impact of their decision will be, what the consequence will be, and what the implication of those consequences will be. This is a tricky one, as we don't really know how the future will be, so evaluate our action impact on other life, just thinking about the consequence, can be a tricky one to work on. Third, virtue ethics. The argument is that if you're a virtuous person, you will do virtuous things. So if you're a good person, you will be a good researcher. This links with the whole neoliberal philosophy, as we are placing emphasis on responsibilities, very much on individuals, to ensure everybody's welfare. 4. Shared values, where more than understanding ethic as rules that are applied by an individual, ethic is understood as a shared value system within your research team or with your participants. This can work as a value base where you can go back if you face difficulties and ethical dilemmas, or when you're planning your research. However, ethic in research is more complex because we are working with others in our research. For example, will it be ethical to present our experiment as an activity about individuals' perception of society, instead of an experiment to know how people create a stereotype about a group? What about the consequence of telling participants the aim of the study? Could this affect our results? It is unlikely that we have all the answer about ethical dilemmas, mostly because research is not static. Rather, it is context-dependent, and to understand ethics just as regulation, as the Euro-Western paradigm tends to approach, is not enough. Hence, ethical discussions have moved towards promoting social justice in research, where the biomedical principle of not harm is just the baseline where ethical discussions start. In this quote from Bajela Chilisa, we can see a different approach from the Euro-Western research paradigm. You can pause the video if you want to take notes about this quote or to reflect on how this quote shows a different approach to the approaches that we actually mentioned before. According to Bajela Chilisa, the indigenous research ethical theory proposed that a researcher must be guided by 4 R's. Relational accountable responsibility. Even though we separate our research in different phases or parts, they are all connected and the researcher is accountable to all. Respectful representation. Participants are people, and we need to be respectful towards them and their culture, backgrounds, and knowledge systems, paying attention to them, creating and facilitating spaces for their voices. Reciprocal appropriation. Sometimes we talk about participants thinking of our research, what we need. However, research must provide benefit to the researcher and, most of all, to the community researcher. Rights and regulation during the research process. Ethical protocols that accord to colonized and marginalized ownership of the research process and the knowledge producers. We need to be respectful also with the knowledge producers. We are not the owners of the knowledge. The knowledge was constructed, especially by the communities. Hence, from this perspective, knowledge is shared and co-created rather than collected, which gives the idea that the knowledge was already there and the researcher just found it, or obtained it, which gives the idea that knowledge is an object that is taken from other. These ideas have implications for research methods, but also for the ethical approach that we will take. From this perspective, ethical practices must consider the participants in an active role of producer of knowledge and the research process. As the graph shows, these 4 R's are part of a feedback process and are related to each other.